Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And welcome to another episode of Wednesday Night Live. And the topic is, based on this week's chapter, intrigued me very much when I was reading a verse or two, which, as we shall discuss, I believe captures one of the most crucial and critical ingredients in success in life. And that is, are you spreading your wings? Now, some people don't even know they have wings. But in case you do know you have wings, the question is whether you're spreading them. I've quoted this quote many times because it just captures both the sadness and the power and potential of life in such a powerful way. The quote is from Thoreau, who wrote in Walden. He writes that most men lead lives of quiet desperation and die with their song still inside them, which, as we can understand, is quite a sad commentary on life, because we all have a song, we all have wings that can take flight, but very often in life our wings are suppressed, repressed, or even clipped. So it's a very important question, individually and collectively, to ask ourselves and ask each other whether you are spreading your wings, whether you have the courage, first of all, whether you have the awareness of what you're capable of, and secondly, whether you then have the courage and the fearlessness to actually go for it and actually soar. Now, most people do not like to admit that they lead a life of quiet desperation, even though today it's become more increasingly popular to talk about these things. But nevertheless, I don't know if talk makes a difference or not. The key thing, of course, is action. So the verse that struck me, that literally talks about this, is in this week's chapter. We have the story of the building, constructing of the sanctuary of the temple. So the holy temple that stood in Jerusalem until this day still captivates the minds of millions and billions of people, actually. The holy city of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, where for us Jews the only thing that remains is the remnant of one of the walls, one of the outer walls called the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall or the Kotel Hamaravi, which many people visit. Behind the wall there is the Temple Mount, which today is really barren territory. As Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues, when they viewed that, the barrenness, the wilderness that the Temple Mount became, so the colleagues of Rabbi Akiva cried, and the famous story is Rabbi Akiva laughed. They cried because they saw fox running out of the place that was once the Holy of Holies. So they cried over the sadness, the place that was once the center of the universe, the center of spiritual life, the hub. Now it's a place that's become completely rendered into a wild wilderness. Even today, when you look at it, yes, there is a mosque with a beautiful gold dome built right on top of the rock, called the Dome of the Rock, actually. They chose the rock, which is the Even HaShiyah, the central rock upon which the temple was centered. As we know, the temple itself was made up of several sections, all described in detail in this week's chapter. And the center of the center was called the Holy of Holies. And on that rock, which still stands today, on that rock was the Ark, the Holy Ark, tabernacle. And there in that Ark, which described in detail in this week's chapter exactly how that Ark was built, on top of the Ark, which was made out of several layers, lay the two tablets, the holy tablets that were given to Moses at Sinai, as well as the broken tablets, the first tablets that he broke after they built the golden calf, as well as a Sefer Torah. There was also a Torah scroll inside there. all inside of the ark in the Holy of Holies, which was really inaccessible, except the high priest would enter that place once a year for a few minutes. On Yom Kippur, we reconstruct that on Yom Kippur services. The ark, in the construction of the ark and all its intricate details, it talks about the cover of the ark. So in chapter, for those of you that follow the actual chapter and verse, in chapter 25, which begins the story of the ark. So after describing how the ark should be built, the Torah continues and says as follows. You should place into the ark the testimony, which is the Torah which I will give you. And then it continues, you should make a lid, a cover, for the ark of pure gold, and describes the size, exact size. And then you should make 2 golden cherubs, which in Hebrew is keruvim, which we'll soon discuss. And they should be made carved out of the golden cover, out of that gold. And here's the details. Make 1 cherub from one and the other from the other end. So basically the cover of the ark had 2 cherubs, 2 images. And this is how the Torah continues. They should both be on both ends, and the cherubs should have their wings spread upwards, sheltering the lid with their wings, and their faces toward one another. And then it continues and talks about God speaking and meeting Moses at this place, and this is where all divine communication of the entire Torah traveled. It said through the portal. We'll call it a portal between these 2 cherubs, between these 2 images. The exact words are like this. I will speak with you, this is God speaking to Moses, from above the cover, between the 2 cherubs that are upon the ark. And this becomes the story of how divine revelation, divine communication takes place throughout the entire Torah. All the communication to Moses came from between these 2 cherubs from the top of the ark. So the ark, we can understand, of course, is a critical component. Some opinions it's the center piece of the entire Mishkan, the entire temple, because this is the place where you have the mandate, the blueprint which God gave mankind, the human race, and that's the Torah. But what exactly is the significance of these cherubs? It's very cryptic and mysterious. And what kind of images are they anyway? Keruvim. What does the word keruvim even mean in Hebrew? And there are different opinions, which I shall share, but especially also the key thing is the spreading of the wings. The spreading of the wings that spread over and shielded and covered, spread over the entire cover of the ark, which itself is an interesting image. So the ark, in a sense, was protected by these 2 cherubs. They represent some type of protection, some type of that shielded, that covered, that spread over the ark, like a type of embrace. So, in exploring, of course, what is the relevance of this, because that's the big key operative question, what is the relevance to our lives? It becomes very apparent as soon as you hear the word spreading wings, that's exactly what it means. It's talking about the spreading of our own wings, of our possibilities. And the story here in the Mishkan has to be one that is personally relevant, in the sense where, you may be familiar with this, but right in the beginning of the chapter when it talks about the building of the sanctuary, so it says, maybe the shortest mission statement ever mentioned, made of 2 words. Where God says to Moses, "V'sa'asuli migdash, build for me a sanctuary, a holy place, migdash, and v'shachanti b'seichem, and I will rest among you." That God will rest among you, the people. So 2 words is essentially captures the whole purpose of existence. Divine presence among us. So the Shalah points out a very obvious question. What does this verse mean? In English, translated, it says, "Build for me a sanctuary and I will rest." What would be the end of the sentence? I will rest in it. Right? Sanctuary is in it. Instead, the Torah says, "Build for me a sanctuary and I will rest b'tzeicham, among them." Where's the them? We're not talking about people. We're not talking about a plural. We're talking about a building. And the Shalah, who is a great middle-aged 16th century mystic and scholar and sage, Yitzchak Horowitz was his name, Rabbi Yitzchak Horowitz, he writes, as do others, the Rishis Chochmah and other commentaries, that in this change, this shift, the Seicham tells you the whole secret of the temple. Why would God need a temple anyway? Does he have no place to rest? Because God need a resting place? Is this some type of shelter? The whole point of the sanctuary was to have an environment, a prototype, where God rests among the people. So it wasn't about the bricks and the mortar, about the stones and the wood, or in the time of the portable sanctuary, the materials. That was not about God resting among materials. It was about being a channel, as I mentioned, a portal, a place where the divine rests among us. And there are long, extensive commentaries that explain that the temple, in all its intricate detail, described in this chapter and again repeated in the chapters that follow, is actually a model for life and actually a microcosm of each of us human beings. And just like, for instance, a human being is made up of 3 key components. We have a head, a torso, a chest, and legs, 3 key parts of a body, called the moyach, leiv, kavod, or reish, guf, regel, however you interpret it. So too the temple was made of 3 departments. There was the Holy of Holies. That was like the central nervous system. That's where the mind rested, the Torah. Then there was what's called Kodesh, the Holy, was an outer chamber outside of the Holy of Holies. And then there were 3 components, 3 particular vessels. There was on the right, there was the table, it was called the Shulchan, where they brought every day was loaves of bread as offerings. On the left was the menorah. The menorah is the candelabra that was lit every day, the menorah of light. And the center was the Mizbeach HaPnimi, called the altar of incense. So just like there were the 3, the same 2 in our chest. We have right arm, the left arm, and the heart. And as I said, in these commentaries, and I discussed this a few years ago in detail, actually it's available, a breakdown detail of how the temple is actually a model, a microcosm of a human being, and also of the entire universe, because we also know the human being is a microcosm of the universe. So studying the details of the temple, you really understand the dynamics. It's like an X-ray of our own psyches and our own souls. And literally, each component, literally, every detail, not just the general structure, not just the vessels, but even their details. There's actually an entire book called Peres Ha'ela, written by someone who was called Rabbi Isserlish, known as the Ramah. He was one of the codifiers of Shulchan Aruch, Ramah, very famous scholar of the 18th century. He writes an entire dedicated book, mystical, Kabbalistic work, mostly mystical, showing every detail of the temple, how it reflects in our lives. And he's not the only one. The Shalah does it, and the Bechaya and others. So it's actually a fascinating study to understand ourselves. You have here, right here, a model, maybe the oldest model of what we look like if one were to strip all the layers, what our basic skeleton, it's called the spiritual genome and DNA of the human being looks like. The temple is a reflection of that. So, therefore, it's clearly understood what means V'shachanti b'seicham. We grow up, we are born into this world. Our souls enter into our bodies upon our birth, upon conception, then upon birth. And we live our lives. Each of us have our own trajectory. Most of us don't really have a plan. And then at some point in life, we begin to search and seek where we're going and where we're coming from and what is the higher purpose, etc., etc. When in fact, there is actually a very specific plan and mission that each soul is charged with, that most of us are unaware of, which itself is also a sad commentary. And this is ultimately the purpose. The purpose is for your body, for your life as you know it, to be a sanctuary, a environment, a resting place, a dwelling place for your divine purpose. And every aspect of your life, from your head to your toe, from every aspect of your psyche, of your soul, of all your faculties, are constructed in the model that the temple was constructed. And by studying the temple, you're really studying about yourself and learning who you are and learning about what you're supposed to be doing with your faculties and your skills and your opportunities and everything that comes your way. And hence the word, V'shachanti b'seicham, build for me a sanctuary. This is God's command to each of us. You live in this world. Don't just live don't live a life that's focused on your own selfish needs and the immediate here and now, instant gratification, but rather see your life, see even your body, even your home, everything that all the space you occupy in this world, see that as an opportunity for you to transform it into an environment where your soul feels comfortable. So instead of the soul being led by the whims and the desires of whatever comes our way that tempts and seduces us, the other way around, the soul becomes the driving force, the captain of the ship. So think of the example of, let's say, a hammer and a hand. You want your hand to inform the hammer how to knock on a nail, not the hammer to tell your hand what to do. But we live in a world, as the mystics put it, it's topsy-turvy, inside out. Instead of the material world being seen for what it is, which is a glove, to allow the hand to express itself, the glove becomes the focus, and the hand is either forgotten or secondary, which of course sounds quite insane, but that's the way the world works. We travel from the outside in, when in reality everything is really from the inside out. From the outside in, everything you experience in life you look at, and then you process. But you look at yourself from the inside out. You don't need your 5 senses to know that you exist. You don't need your sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell to experience yourself. Those are really channels, those are interfaces between the world and yourself. So we personally, each of us, works from the inside out. First you feel things inside, then you express it. Hopefully that's the way it should work. But everything else in life, and that really occupies most of our life, is from the outside in. Something happens, and then you process it, you react. The key message, v'shachanti b'seichem, simply means taking control of your life. Who's running the show? Is it whatever comes your way with a plan, without a plan, and you just react and hopefully can handle any challenge that comes your way? Or is there an inner strategy that begins from within, and then you create your opportunities because you know where you're going? So anyone running any business or any type of function, anything with an objective knows you first begin with an objective and a plan and a goal, and then you find the resources to implement it. You don't first begin, okay, my resources, and then figure out what am I supposed to do with them. But if we think about our lives, especially not our business lives, our personal, psychological, emotional, spiritual lives, it's exactly how it works. Things are thrust, suddenly something comes your way, okay, what do I do now? Because nobody's trained us to think from the inside out. No one's trained us from youngest of age that you should be figuring out what your soul is supposed to be doing, and then using your body and the tools as a tool chest to figure out how to do it. We begin the other way around. Schools, the best schools, even the best, at best give you a good tool chest. They teach you about your skills, they teach you how to do it. But why to do it, and therefore what to do, is completely up to something that we have no real clue. So we're taught excellent tools. We're taught tools how to master the systems that exist. Systems, whether it's mathematics, whether it's literature, whether it's processing information, whether it's knowing how to understand a bigger picture from the details. Each in their own field, whether it's medicine or law or science or any particular field. And then we take these tools and try to make the best of it to make money. You ask most people, why are you making money? With money I can buy things, and then I can be happy. Which of course doesn't really work, but we think it works. On the other hand, most importantly, we don't know what's our alternative. By the time we're thinking too seriously about it, we're already thrust into a world where we must make ends meet. We have bills to pay. And once you're consumed with a job, how much time do you really have to think about transcendental needs? Well, the Torah actually reverses the whole process and just states it as it is from the outset. God tells Moses, tell the people, this is the purpose of existence. That everything given to you is in order for you to make it into a mikdash. Turn it into a mikdash, into a sacred place. That I shall be able to dwell among you. But this isn't just about God dwelling in the type of fairy tale image of a God with a long white beard in heaven that strikes us with lightning when we misbehave. We're talking about a divine presence in a very sophisticated and comprehensive fashion of a deeper reality. Is this outer reality that we experience, is it a vessel? Is it a container? Is it a platform for divine presence or for some other presence, which is, as I said, our immediate here and now? One could submit that the Jewish people are here today because they never lost sight of that. No matter what they went through in life, they knew that the bottom line was that you have to in some way immortalize your life, eternalize your life, by not being distracted by the here and now, which will die with you, but by creating actual living monuments, living entities in this world that will continue on to convey and be a channel for some higher presence. It's as simple as it gets. The Medrash says actually something fascinating. It says that had the Romans and the Babylonians and the nations of the world known what the temple does for them, not only would they have not destroyed it, they would have surrounded with legions of armies to protect it from any type of harm. Because the temple was seen as a portal between heaven and earth. As Jacob, the famous story of Jacob when he falls asleep on his journey to Haran, and he has this dream with the ladder, Jacob's ladder, and then he suddenly wakes up and realizes that this is a holy place. He's very disturbed that he fell asleep there. And he says the word Zeh Shar Shamayim, this is a place, the gate to heaven. So when people look for those vortexes, whether in Sedona or other places in the world, the ultimate vortex is Jerusalem. And this is why, till this day, thousands of years, the nations of the world are still battling over that one little piece of territory. There's a sense that there's some power there. And you go there, you can sense it. After you get beyond the veils of all the new malls and the westernization of the commercialization of it, there is a sanctity there, and it is a vortex. It's a center in a way, a gate. Especially if you've ever been to Jerusalem when it snows, you know what I'm talking about. I was there in not this snowfall, but even a bigger one a few years ago. Like 10 inches fell. It's a big phenomenon there. Besides being a holiday, it's actually quite interesting. You know, I'm used to snow. I'm a New Yorker. So this is what the temple is about. V'shachanti b'seichem. Imagine a place, where does heaven kiss earth? You know, people have always wondered, poets and romantics and thinkers and prophets and philosophers, is there a place where the infinite meets the finite? And our answer is yes. V'shachanti b'seichem, that's where it happens. The temple is that type of portal. And even today, when there's no physical building standing there, except the remnant, as I said, of the wall, the western wall, it's still considered a sacred place. That's why we don't tread on the Temple Mount. Because as the Maimonides puts it, Kedusha le'zazim imkema. Holiness never fades. It never leaves its place. Once the holiness saturated the earth there, no matter what happened, through the thousands of years, it can never disappear. Some say the Western Wall is a symbol of that. Can you imagine what are the odds that the wall should remain standing after all the wars and all the enemies? Why didn't anyone ever blow it up? I mean, if you go to the tunnels under Jerusalem, you see how the Romans bent over backwards to try to eradicate any remnant that there was once a temple. They couldn't do it because Herod built the temple foundation so deeply into the mountain, it's very hard to get to eliminate it. But the wall remains standing. Because there are things that are eternal in this world, and though they're not visible, because anything real is not visible to the naked eye, but it remains there, and this is all captured in this one verse, V'shachanti b'seichem. So this is a long introduction to bring us back to what I wanted to focus on, not the entire temple and not all the other components. As I said, I've discussed this in previous years at length. We had a 3-4 part series discussing the component, the counterpart, and of each aspect of our lives in the temple as an archetype for life. So what I want to focus on here is on the cover of the ark. I don't believe I've ever discussed this point. And as I said, the spreading of the wings is the key giveaway. So what are the keruvim? As I said, the ark, we can understand. It's a container for the Torah. Think of it like the brain. The brain is a container for the mind and for everything that enters the mind. The ark is symbolic of that. The ark was a container for the central nervous system, for the divine mind. CAT scan of God's mind is the Torah. Okay, but what is the cover? So the cover also can be understood. You protect it with a cover. And anything that's sacred, you don't just leave open. It's a sign of respect. You cover something. Fine. But then on top of the cover, we suddenly have this command to engrave, to carve these two cherubs, keruvim. So there are different commentaries that discuss what are these keruvim. And there are references throughout the Torah. I'm not going to do an exhaustive study now on the keruvim, but I will give you a little overview because they're tremendously helpful to understand its meaning. So first we begin with the technical meaning, and then we'll enter into the soulful meaning, the personal meaning, which is of course the main focus here. Its personal relevance and its message. So the keruvim, literally the word keruv, comes in Hebrew from the word keravia. So some say it means children. In Hebrew or in Aramaic, the word keravia is the name for a child. Why is it called keravia? In Hebrew, if you know Hebrew, rav means expanding or growing. So like a child grows, that's the meaning of the word the cherub. So when we say in English cherub, it comes from the word keruv, and keruv means something that is growing, like a development, you can say, the developing child. And therefore there's the opinion, which is taken from different midrashim, and Rashi cites it, that the keruvim were actually the two faces of children, one of a boy and one of a girl. And they faced each other, and they had wings. The Ramban Nachmanides has a different opinion, and also quoting different sources, that says no, the fact that where the wings come from. Children don't have wings, seemingly. So he says that in the book of Ezekiel, in the prophecy of Ezekiel, the vision of Ezekiel, he also talks about the cherubs, keruvim, and there he talks about angels. So he says what they were actually images of angels. And then there's a third position that says, based on also on Ezekiel's vision, that it was male and female, but one was, not necessarily male and female, one was a mature adult, and the other one was a child, representative of a teacher and student. So that's another opinion. Obviously Rashi's opinion, which is of course the dominant one, is the one I'm going to focus on, even though all the opinions have validity. But each one has their own reasons for explaining it, for why they choose that opinion. But regardless, you still need to understand what's the significance of these keruvim. So what's the symbolism of them? Why was it necessary to have these images? Just to make the point, even to amplify the question, in Judaism you don't find very often engravings of images. It's actually considered to be not something that's done, because you don't want to create any image that looks and pairs anything that is divine. Here's one exception. Nothing in the temple was an image of any type of face. And here clearly there's images engraved out of gold, which one could say is bordering even on what we would call idolatry. And here, this is not just idolatry, this is a command in the Torah, in the Holy of Holies. So it's interesting as well how that fits in. So what's the meaning and the significance of it? Now the first time the keruvim are actually mentioned in the Torah, those of you Bible scholars probably know, it's right in the beginning actually of Chumash, right in the beginning of Genesis. Also a very interesting context. So there's an expression in the beginning of Genesis, it says, I don't have it here, I'll just do it from memory. So it says in Genesis 3, chapter 3, that after Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden, so it says that God placed keruvim at the door of Garden of Eden that they should not be able to return, to protect the Garden of Eden from their returning there. And it says that these keruvim stood there with a flaming sword. That's what it says. And it says that until this day they're still standing there. So it's interesting what parallel is there between those keruvim and these keruvim. There actually it seems to be almost like Rashi and others seem to be like avenging type of angels, protectors, with a type of almost a severity to it. Far cry from necessarily the keruvim that we talk about on the temple, on top of the ark. And then, of course, as I pointed out, the verse says clearly that these children, these faces had wings spread out that spread over the entire cover of the cover of the ark. So there are different commentaries that talk about the significance of this. I'll just cite one or two that that are very powerful and relevant. As soon as you hear the word children, and you hear the word Torah, it immediately evokes a very famous medrash. The medrash says the following: that when God gave the Torah at Sinai, which is 2 chapters ago, it says that He asked for guarantors, collateral. He wanted guarantors. Who's going to guarantee? I'm giving you the most precious gift of mine, basically my operator's manual for life. It's a pretty valuable document. And as a matter of fact, the angels were very jealous and opposed to God giving it to the human race. But before I give it to you, I want to have guarantors. So Moses offered first the patriarchs. Look, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they were great men. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, they guarantee it. God rejected that. Not because He didn't think they were great people, but He rejected it. We'll soon see why. Maybe because they lived in the past. How can they guarantee the future? Then He offered as guarantors the Skanim, the sages. Scholars. They will study the Torah. They will make sure it's passed on. They will teach it to the next generation. And that too was rejected. There are different opinions what else they offered, what else Moses offered, but finally, what God finally accepted was the children. The children, Banenu, our children will be our guarantors. And when God heard that, He accepted that. And the obvious reason is because children are the future. You could have great teachers, but if you don't have students, and you don't have another generation, it'll die with the teachers. The children guaranteed that V'shenantam levanecha, you will teach it to your children, and therefore it will pass on. So immediately, when you read this and you say, okay, well, the children on top of the ark, which is the covenant, the Torah, pretty clear the symbolism. That's what it means. Why their wings spread? Because they're spread out to protect the Torah. Who will ensure and guarantee its future? The 2 cherubs, symbolic of the children, boy and girl, little children, and their wings represent their enthusiasm, their dedication, their commitment, and they protect. It covers the entire cover, the kapeiros, which was the cover of the ark. Okay, that's beautiful, and that really answers the question. But of course, as usual, you need to go a little deeper here, because obviously, what does that mean? The children will guarantee it. And what does it mean, the wings? What is the significance of the wings, besides the symbolism I just mentioned? Well, this takes us back to the key thing, which is whenever the Torah describes something, there's 4 levels of interpretation. There's the pshat, the literal. The remez is the allegorical. The drush is the homiletic, the talmudic, like the legal, the midrashic. And finally there's sod, the secret, or the esoteric, the mystical. And it's an acronym, if you want to remember it. Pei, Reish, Dalet, Samach, Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, is an acronym for the word Pardes, which means the orchard. Pardes in Torah, whenever you hear the word Pardes, the orchard, it's always a symbol for mystical experience. You hear about the 4 that entered into the Pardes, the 4 great sages that entered into the orchard. It was Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, and Rabbi Akiva. 3 of them were hurt, and 1 came out, entered in peace, and came out in peace. So Pardes is an acronym for these 4 levels of interpretation. Just to thicken the plot, in case you feel you mastered the Torah, consider this, that the Arizal says that there's 600,000 interpretations in every letter of the Torah, 600,000 in Pshat, 600,000 in Remez, 600,000 in Drush, and 600,000 in Sod. So that's 2.4 million. Okay, so we have a little work cut out for us. How many do you think where are you up to? Huh? That's in each letter, that is. So it's a number. And now there are 304,805 letters in the Torah. So you do the math. See why Jews are still arguing. I mean, there's a lot of interpretations. Millions, billions. So when looking at this verse, what I just described, I would say is somewhat a little pshat and a little remez maybe. But there's also deeper meaning behind the whole story. And this takes us into the anatomy of the soul, of what is the ark, what is the Torah, or what is a child. And most importantly, who are we? Remember, the operative statement I made earlier was V'shachanti b'seicham. The purpose of it all is that divine presence rests among us, which means essentially that your soul should have a comfortable resting place on this earth. How many people can say their soul is comfortable inside your life, inside your body? It's healthy to have restlessness and have some measure of angst, but we have conflicts in our lives. We have many voices. Voices between our moral voice and our voice of survival. We have the voice of our personal lives, our professional lives. You name it. You have the voice of your mind and you have the voice of your heart. I mean, we've got voices and interests tugging at us in every which way, in every direction. And obviously the healthiest life is integration, where you're able to find and create harmony between these voices. But to do so, you have to have some common denominator. You have to have, as I said, a driving force, an overriding force that overrides all the voices and essentially guides you and directs the voices of your life instead of your voices directing you. That's the difference between a fragmented life and a unified life. So V'shachanti b'seicham is the mission, the general mission, and we'll talk about how we apply that to our personal lives, because each of us have our unique mission. But overall, V'shachanti b'seicham, discovering what your soul is like, and making sure that your life is aligned to your soul, not that your soul is aligned to your life. In other words, the tool chest should be aligned to your purpose instead of your purpose being aligned to your tools. Which, of course, as I said, is it would be quite intolerable in any normal situation. But because our soul is invisible and because it's so easy to gravitate to our physical material needs, not as easy. It's easier said than done. So in that context, what is the purpose of the ark in the purpose of discovering your soul? So the ark is the mind. And what is the mind? The mind is both the central nervous system and also the captain of your ship. In the words of the Tanya, it goes like this. We have primary two conscious forces that speak to us at any given moment. One is your emotional voice and one is your cognitive voice. To define what that means, how do you know whether it's an emotional voice or it's a cognitive voice? And as we'll see in a moment, they also mix, they're not mutually exclusive. But don't just dissect it just simply for discussion purposes. The cognitive voice, called in Hebrew moichin, intellect, is essentially, in personality, it's reflective. It's a reflective entity. It reflects on things. The emotional voice is impulsive. There you got yourself a very, very clear delineation, distinction. It's impulsive or reflective. Someone comes over you and tries to sell you something, or you get these telemarketers or whatever it may be, or invest. They're trying to get your emotions. They're trying to manipulate your emotion. That's the key place to go to get you intrigued, to make you feel that if you don't do it now, you lose the opportunity. Whether they're selling you junk or not, that's second issue, secondary. But especially if it's junk, they got to get the emotional. Because if the reflective part of you gets triggered, you're going to reflect. And you're going to say, give me time, let me think about it. It won't be impulsive. And usually when you reflect on things, the initial euphoria tends to wane. And if it doesn't, maybe then it deserves to your attention. But most human mistakes happen because we don't allow the reflective voice to enter. Think how many mistakes you've made in your life because you just reacted impulsively and you couldn't control yourself. Whether it was someone insulted you and right away, reflexive action, reflexive reaction, or something else. How many temptations, forces that seduce us. It's all that moment, the moment of passion. Even while you're doing it, you may realize it's not even right. And then afterwards you realize it wasn't even worth it. Even at the times, sometimes you realize it's not worth it. But there's something about emotional power. Emotional power has a different type of control. It doesn't work in a reflective way. It works in an impulsive way. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing because there are times, for example, God forbid you go into a danger zone, a fire, your emotions are critical. It's not time to reflect. It's time to run, to flee. But those are exclusive. That's emergency situations. So in a healthy situation, what you'd like to have is the reflective mind reviewing and researching a particular item, and then it could tell the heart, you know something, I did my research, it's safe to go there. Allow yourself to trust. I mean, a good, healthy process works like that. Because remember, reflection alone could also you can end up sitting on a fence the rest of your life, reflecting back and forth, and never making decisions. On the other hand, without the reflection, your decisions are going to be impulsive and very clearly going to make big mistakes. So it's called the mind informing the heart. That's a healthy process. Again, I'm excluding, obviously this isn't across the board. There are cases, of course, where you have to rely on your feelings. And then, of course, once your mind has trained your heart, there are times you could just rely on your instincts because they have been trained. Like think of soldiers or think of an army or anyone who's developed already skills, then they can rely on some of their reflexes. But barring that, it's generally healthier reflection. So these are two voices. So the first thing in life, the first tool that we were given that distinguishes us from the beast, that distinguishes us from being completely impulsive, is our minds. Animals in the wild do not have that, and they're not expected to. They can be brilliant, they can be shrewd, but it's all about survival. There's no way you're going to convince a predator to take it easy and control your hunger for, let's say, another day or something. When they're hungry, they're going to go hunting. And when they want to breed, they will breed. And that's how it should be. Just like you're not going to convince the sun not to rise tomorrow morning. Because there is a certain mechanism and clockwork necessary to keep the world going. The human being is the only one that can deviate. And also has the cognitive ability to control an impulse. And this is the key to the story of life. So, the first thing, if you're talking about checking who's in control in your life, is not allowing your impulses to control your life. Most people are essentially impulsive creatures. Even the most intelligent, put them in the right situation, and they can be seduced by many different things. Not everyone likes to admit it, but most people are vulnerable in that sense. And there's nothing wrong with that as well. You know, where problems begin is when you start denying it. When you start justifying your subjectivity with all kinds of objective excuses, when all it is you're really doing is using your brilliant mind to cover up on your immaturity. You have a lot of smart people who are very immature, but they're smart, so they know how to cover their tracks. They always have an excuse. There are people who are masters of this. You see anybody that's in a trouble situation, an addiction or something like that, and especially if they're smart, they're the most dangerous. Because their mind is not only not thinking objectively, it's totally under control of their emotions, which is what he explains in Tanya. Just like the blood of the heart rushes to the mind, right? The mind also needs blood. So too the impulsive emotions suddenly distort your mind. So the first domain, the first place where you want control is over your mind. Because without that, we're lost. Without that, the emotions take over, and they will create biases to the point of blindness where you won't even know what's right and wrong. You'll convince yourself what is right and wrong based on your own personal self-interest. Now, I'm not getting down to debate. Some people argue, like a Richard Dawkins would argue, and some other radical atheists, that the selfish gene is the driving force. There's no such thing as not self-interest. Everything is selfish. I'm not going there. From a Torah perspective, that's incorrect. Torah perspective is, yes, there's a selfishness inside of us, but there's also a selflessness. And therefore, the mind is the most important thing, and that's why the mind must be most protected. Maybe open the window there, if you don't mind. Getting very hot in here. Okay, now. Yeah, so that's why. Now let's go back to the temple. So where is the mind secured? In the Holy of Holies. Because it is the most important element that allows a subjective human being to explore. You know, we're born as children, we're subjective creatures. Children particularly are impulsive, and their minds are not yet developed. But as time passes, as their minds develop, what gives us the ability to rise above ourselves, to consider another person, to have a relationship? And a relationship is emotional. But it's the mind that allows you to explore and realize there are things that are greater than just me. That immediately is a mind thing. Take away the mind, and then we would be just creatures of habit like every other creature on earth. So the mind is placed in the ark, the Torah is placed in the ark, in the Holy of Holies, protected, place that nobody enters there, because that can never become defiled. That's the purest place inside of us. Now you say, well, the mind, is the mind the intellect? No, but the mind, as the Kabbalists explain, is a bridge to the divine. And just to use one example, think of like when you think of an idea, a flash of an idea enters your mind. Where does it come from? So the word for in Hebrew for a flash of an idea is called chokhmah. Heard the word chokhmah? Chokhmah is made up of two words, koyach ma, the power of what? Of what? Because it's like a what? It's a sense of, or it evokes always a sense of awe, a sense of something beyond us when an idea enters into your mind, because nobody knows the secret and the mystery of where ideas come from. Now, I know some people have thought that it comes from the shower head, because most ideas come in the shower. So maybe the shower head. But if you open up the shower head, you come to realize that you don't get ideas from there. So where do ideas come from? So the way the Kabbalah puts it is, it comes from a place called the unconscious, the collective unconscious, and think of it like a reservoir of water. An infinite reservoir of water, where all ideas come from, and the conscious mind, think of that as the faucet in your sink. What it does is, it regulates the flow, so it comes drop by drop by drop, but it's coming from a far greater place, and we can even sense that. Anyone who's experienced that type of epiphany or innovation, you sense that moment is always a sense of awe. Then when you begin to develop the idea, which in this language is called bina, that's when you begin to own it. You begin to break it down in detail, and you lose often that sense of awe, that sense of wonder and amazement. But the key is to always hold on. You want to always hold on to the chokhmah part, which is the ma, that type of. In Kabbalistic or Chassidic terminology, that ma chokhmah elicits a bittul. It elicits something that's beyond yourself. Again, ask any writer, any thinker. The moment when you're in the zone and you are a channel for an idea, it's exactly the word people will use. I'm a channel for an idea that's greater than I am. And it's a completely humble experience. As much as even the greatest innovation is a humble experience, because you know yourself that I don't know where it came from, it channeled through me. Then there comes a point where your ego comes into play, and now you call your intellectual property attorney, you make sure to protect it, you make sure to try to make as much money you can from it, get some glory and awards. But that has nothing to do with the chokhmah, that has to do with you. So there's an expression they say by Chassidim, they say, chokhmah cares about the truth of the idea. Bina cares that I understand it. It's a very big difference. There's no I in true wisdom. So true wisdom, Reishish Chachma Yiras Hashem, it says. The beginning of all wisdom is awe of the divine. It's the awe, the mystery, you could say the enchantment, the magic, a magical moment. And that's why Chachma is compared in Kabbalah Chassidus talks about as being a channel. Again, a bridge between heaven and earth. So in the temple itself, which was a bridge, a portal, in itself, where's the real portal is the Holy of Holies. That's exactly the point. And that's why God's word came from that Aron. That's where the communication happens. Each of us has a Holy of Holies like that. It's the purest part of your life. It's the purest part of your soul. And the first place it enters is actually in your mind. But don't confuse the mind with intellect. It enters in your mind. It enters in your ability to transcend yourself, which is a cognitive experience. Emotions cannot transcend themselves. They're not meant to. The emotions are meant to protect you. They're meant to express your needs and your impulses. The mind is the only place that can travel to places that your heart cannot travel to. Your heart can only travel to what is your subjective reality. Your mind can dream, can imagine, can think of things that you may never be there, but you can dream it. And once you can dream it, it can happen. So the mind is literally like a channel to places that are beyond us. It's essentially the first step of transcendence. Again, I don't want to confuse it with the intellect as most of us think of intellectuals. Think of it more of the mind being able to think of something, conceive of something outside of yourself. Which is what, ultimately, where real healthy love comes from, where all healthy relationships come from. It's not just about me. Because if it was just about you, then love would be a selfish love. You serve my needs, I'll give you some love for that. It's a type of reciprocal thing. The mind can say, I see in this person something greater than me. I see in this person, I see in this individual a reality that's beyond my reality. That's the mind at work. And then when the mind informs the emotions, as the Hasidic masters put it, then that sense of transcendence travels from the mind into the heart. I'll use a psychological example. I don't know if you've ever heard in psychology the concept of the Cognitive Liferaft. It's an expression used. Not that common, but it's a very interesting concept. What's the Cognitive Liferaft? Is this, that when people who've been hurt in life, they've been hurt especially in their childhood, especially if it was a consistent hurt, so there's a wound. There's a deep wound inside the soul, inside the psyche. And that wound has strong impact on our lives. Of course, the first consequences are how we trust. The second is in relationships. It will always affect our sexuality, intimacy. It will affect the deepest parts of your life, choices and decisions. The places where you're most vulnerable, essentially, because that's the area that you were wounded, that you were violated or hurt. So as a result, what happens is, essentially, if you could imagine it, just to use an example, what happens when a child is scared, frightened? When a child is frightened, they shrivel up, sometimes actually in the fetal position, and which is often a sign of people sleep. You can tell a lot from that. And they shrivel up and they hide, even physically. They'll hide. They'll hide from danger. A child doesn't know the idea, as has been proven, that you can just leave an abusive home. For a child, walking out of the home is like walking off the earth. The threshold of the home is literally like the edge of the earth. It's hard for us to imagine as adults. But for a child, its reality is its parents. Its reality is what it has. Its all of existence is its home. That's all it knows. Obviously, a child walks out in the street, but it doesn't see the street as a place to turn to. So a child that's hurt like that will live in fear, and that fear will slowly become a driving force to the point that it will no longer be a loud fear, it will be silent fear. And essentially the child will adjust accordingly, and could even look like a very courageous adult, but it's just masking deep-seated fears, which will emerge when there's vulnerability. It's inevitable, because it's never been resolved. Now that child may never allow themselves to be vulnerable, which itself is a sign of something. They'll build very thick layers of armor, defensive mechanisms, and complex defense mechanisms, which is always a sign. You can see from defense mechanisms, just like antibodies tell you there's an infection, defense mechanisms tell you there's hurt. So in that context, what happens? So how do you deal? Okay, now a child has grown into an adult. A child has already developed a whole new series of mechanisms to protect itself. Now it enters into a relationship and trying to find a healthy relationship, and all these triggers begin to bring up all kinds of evoke memories. This person, this adult, no longer even remember. It's just automatic. Now at this point it's become impulsive, reflexive. So one of the methods used, and really it's a central method, they don't always use this name for it, is this called thing, the Cognitive Liferaft. What does it mean? If someone's frightened, let's say, to go somewhere, let's say you're frightened of swimming, of water. So one of the ways is to push somebody right in. That's one way. As I've often talked about my experience of learning how to dive. But that's another time. Another way, which is not as dangerous or scary, is that you help the person imagine what it means to be like in water. You start trying to imagine or dream of a situation which initially may be frightening, but you're only dreaming about it. So all you're doing is, let's do a mind game, a mind exercise. The mind will go to places the heart is afraid to go to, because, we read books, we watch things, we could see things or read about things that are not necessarily, because we're not going there. So in a strange way, the cognitive detachment allows you to enter places that your heart would never want to go. And that's a very critical element. It's called a cognitive life raft. It's like a life raft. You know what? Let's go with the mind to a place. Now let's just do this in a very safe way. And when a person begins to develop in their mind, then they see, the concept sounds right to me. Slowly, that mind can speak to the heart and tell this child the inner child that's frightened, you know something? You can come out from the hiding place. I checked it out and it's safe. Now, this doesn't mean it happens overnight and takes work and the proper trust and there's setbacks, but it's definitely a working system that I personally have seen work. So there's proof in the pudding for different people in different ways. It's not manipulative because it's not a secret. You tell a person, this is what we're going to do. Sometimes you have to imagine something that you have not been there. The truth is, all of us do this. Healthy people or unhealthy people. We dream about things, and then hopefully we're able to get there. What was it Steve Jobs said? That if you dream it, you can do it. Or it was whoever said it, Einstein. The geniuses of our generation, of our last century. So what you have is a mind that can travel millions of miles faster and farther than your heart will ever want to go. And then the question is, can it educate and guide and train the heart to open up the possibility? And the answer is absolutely yes. And this is what I just described as a critical component, especially in Tanya and other texts, talk about how one grows. Most of us understand, for example, intellectual maturity. What does that mean? It means you can always grow intellectually. Read a new book, go to a new class, take a new course, meet new people. We learn new ideas. But when we ask someone, what about emotionally? Do you think you can grow emotionally? That's a far harder question. Most people say, one second, I'm already an adult. Where am I going to grow? I am who I am. The leopard can't change its spots. That's it. I've developed emotionally. That's not true at all. There was a book several years ago called Emotional Intelligence. Made the big case that that's the key to life is emotional intelligence, not intellectual intelligence. From a Torah point of view, absolutely your emotions can grow. But you need to put work to it, and it's the mind that helps it grow, because the mind allows you to dream of things that your emotions may not have entertained, and then the emotions can follow. So we go back to the Aron in the temple. The Holy of Holies begins with the Aron, which is the ark, which is a container, the brain, for the mind. And it's the mind that is the portal, the channel, to something that is beyond the mind. And allows in new realities. You can conceive of new realities that are beyond your existence right now. And that is actually our salvation point, because that means no matter what's going on in your life, if you're just an emotional creature, a creature of habit, then you're stuck. But because your mind has an open hatch, it's like it's not airtight, it's an open door to another reality, it can draw into your life new realities, which can ultimately be assimilated and internalized and actually change your whole existence. Now, this is not necessarily, as I said, this is a complicated process. It doesn't just happen because you heard a new piece of information. It takes work, but the work is very much outlined and proven to work. So now let's go back here to talk about the children. The thing you see about children is very fascinating. They're the best version of ourselves. In technology, usually the latest version is the best one, right? 1.0, 1.1, 2.1, 3.1. When it comes to life, actually the 1.0 is the best, meaning as you were born. Because you are there at the purest, exactly as God made you. Freshly fallen snow. You know the feeling? Freshly fallen snow. Before anyone stepped on it. And then life begins to wear us down. And we begin to, I don't want to sound depressing, but lack of a better word, let's see, we begin to, what's better than erode? Thank you, deteriorate. It's not very, we'll think of some type of life-affirming statement. We begin to, say, mature, like wrinkle, begin to harden. So just as our arteries harden, so too our personalities harden. A beautiful analogy for this is that we're born warm ball of wax. Every impression that happens in our lives is like engraved in this warm ball of wax. And then the wax begins to harden. And by the time it gets a certain age, the wax is hardened with all the, for good or for bad, its scars and wounds. And then what solution do we have? And we'll talk about that. There are solutions, because just like the wax was warm once, you can warm it again without necessarily annihilating your personality. There's just enough warmth that you can create some dexterity that you can somewhat readjust things. So children are a fascinating study of whom? Of you and me. That's what we looked like once, whether you believe it or not. And it's really almost like a different world. Because number one, we don't even remember the first years of our life. Imagine, we don't remember what you were like when you began. So we have no recollection of the beginning. Just like scientists are looking for the Big Bang, we don't have a recollection of our early formative years. Forget about in our mother's womb. But even the first year or two. I mean, with rare exceptions. Even if you have a glimpse, it's a glimpse at best. So your cutest part of your life, you'll never remember. You know? Well, hopefully you have many more cute moments, but you know what I'm saying. And the thing you see about children is their spontaneity, their natural sense of enthusiasm and exploration. And except in rare instances, which usually is a sign of some problem, a child is a natural, what shall we say, explorer? Or some people call it making a mess. That means they're alive. They're constantly on the move. Right? They're constantly on the move. Looking at this, everything is exciting. The things that we consider monotonous and boring, a child can just spend hours with. They see enchantment in everything. If a child is left on its own, its wings will spread very wide. So where exactly does a child develop the fears, the lack of confidence, not to just be itself? You know, how many of us can say, I'm comfortable to just be myself anywhere I like. I don't really care what other people think. Many people like to claim that they're that way, but being that way and claiming is not the same thing. What happened? What happened was that we were surrounded by adults and by environments and schools that projected upon us all kinds of reasons to suppress, to hold back and not express and not spread our wings. So the Torah tells us exactly the way it's supposed to be in the natural sense. This mind that is developing is meant to be protected by the wingspan, spread out over the entire extent of the entire arc. Can you imagine the whole Torah? All of God's wisdom, all wisdom on earth, is all under the protection of spread wings of two little children. Because those children capture the essence of what it means to be alive. And the wings are always spread open. They're never closed. The Talmud does say an interesting thing, that these keruvim had a miraculous element to them. When the Jews were in God's favor, they would face toward each other. And when they were not in favor, they would face back to back. But their wings never ever shriveled, never diminished. No matter what, they were always spread out. Because the ultimate expression, I would say, the ultimate realization of a person's life is that you have your wings spread, that you can really achieve anything you want to achieve. You know, they tell the story about the nightingale, the parable. When God created the nightingale, a beautiful bird, beautiful wings as well, and a beautiful voice. So the nightingale came, came to God and said, thank you for my beautiful voice, but I have a problem. The problem goes like this. I may be perched on a branch one evening, serenading into the night, and a hungry predator looking for a good piece of meal will come by. He'll be attracted to me because of my voice. So please, God, give me something to protect myself from my enemies. So God offered the bird a beak, a sharp beak, which can be quite a formidable weapon. The bird decided to inspect the merchandise and says, no, an elegant little bird like me and with a nose like that, no, that's not going to work. Looks matter, you know. So then God offered the bird these very sharp claws, set of claws, and the claws too have power, ability to defend itself. And the bird also rejected for the same reason. It's unbecoming, such nails, for a beautiful bird like me. So finally God offered the bird a set of wings. It's called knafayim, wings. In Hebrew, knafayim. And the bird looked at the wings, was very perplexed. What are these things? What are these things? And the bird says to God, I don't understand. You're the master of the universe. You created the world with such design and eloquence. And I have enough body weight with me. And you're giving me 2 extra pieces of dead weight that'll just weigh me down even further when I need to escape from a predator. So of course God said, no, little bird. These are called wings. And when you learn to use them and spread the wings, you'll know how to soar and you can escape your enemies. So, though the wings made the bird weigh more, but no bird in the world would reject wings, right? Even a bird on a diet, because actually birds don't go on diets. They don't have these problems. Overeating is not a problem in the animal kingdom. Even though it's been reported that some human neurosis is spreading to the animal world, but we talked about this as well. There are veterinarians, therapists, animal therapists today that tell people, couples, that there's too much anxiety in your home, the dog is going crazy, so you got to calm down. So they won't do it for each other, but they'll do it for their dog. Okay, at least shalei lishma ba lishma, what do they say? From ulterior motives you come to pure motives. So what is this analogy? The analogy is that we all have wings. But there are 2 scenarios. We either don't know we have wings, or we know we don't know how to use them. What's the saddest thing to see is a bird that's grounded. But that's usually a case where a bird doesn't have wings, or the wings have been hurt or clipped, wounded. Even sadder is a bird that has wings doesn't know it can fly. Interesting, just a little related analogy. They tell the analogy of the chrysalis, the caterpillar, goes through the process, metamorphosis in its cocoon, and then emerges as a butterfly. So just as it's about to emerge, the cocoon is starting to open up, chrysalis. So a person sees this butterfly struggling to get out of the cocoon. And he has compassion. So he says, let me help the butterfly get out. So he takes a pair of scissors. Why, by the way, is it called a pair of scissors anyway? Because it's like 2 things?
Oh, it is.
Okay. Yeah, right, okay. Like a pair of twins. That's just an aside. We always do some word. And takes the scissor and cuts open the cocoon, and hey, great. No more struggle. But unfortunately, one little tragedy. The butterfly never could fly ever. Because part of the butterfly's ability to have the aerodynamics it needs is that it's struggling to get out of the cocoon. That struggle forces liquid into its wings that will permanently remain there and create the perfect balance. But because he decided this crime of compassion, they call it, to be compassionate, that the bird shouldn't struggle, the butterfly. So the butterfly never had the pressure of forcing the liquid into its wings. So the wings were there, nice, you have a beautiful butterfly to observe, but it sat there on a branch the rest of its life. So we all have wings. And if you could put it this way, the entire Judaism and Torah is to teach us what our wings look like and to teach us the courage to take flight. Obviously, a bird is not flying all the time. For a bird to fly, it has to have a nurturing nest first. Every bird grows up in a home. Before it begins to fly, it has a mother, a father protecting it. Then they teach the bird, and then the bird comes the stage where the bird begins to fly. Beautiful to see. So we all need a stage for building the confidence. So we all have these wings, and that's what the Torah is telling us. And these wings are the secret to all of life. If we don't have the 2 children with spread wings, the entire Torah is compromised. Because that's the key. What is the Torah worth if you don't have human beings that have the confidence to take the Torah and transform their lives and the world around them? We need revolutionaries, not just a mandate. The Torah is the mandate, but then you need the revolutionaries. You need an Abraham, a Moses, and the rest of us. So all of us have these wings, and they all develop when we were young children. And the Torah from day one, it's not like the wings are in any way diminished, it's spread out. It covers the entire ark. In the Holy of Holies, this was the dominating feature actually. The ark concealed the Torah within. So in your Holy of Holies, you have powerful, powerful wings that can take you anywhere you want to go. Unfortunately, life, in all situations, even in healthy homes, tends to weaken our confidence in our own wings. We live in a world of conformity. There's a lot of pressure to fit in. A lot of pressure not to find your own voice. And those that continue to fight for their own voice are rarity, because they have to fight an uphill battle. They have to fight people who are constantly detractors, constantly naysayers, saying it's not possible, don't do this, don't do that. You have to fight the fear of risk and risk of failure. But there's no person on earth, no one, that does not have wings. God sent us to this earth with wings. A soul has wings. And the challenge is to discover them and to have the courage to do something about it. So how does one develop that? So he says here, interestingly, that the cherubs, the keruvim, were made out of gold, and the gold itself was made out of the cover of the ark. It wasn't attached. It wasn't like they carved these golden keruvim and put them on and what they call soldered them to or glued them to the cover. It was made out of the cover itself. Cover of what? The cover of the Torah. So what's the significant symbolism of that? So I want to go back to the story of the first cherubs. Remember the ones in the Garden of Eden. What exactly does that mean? What's the problem with Adam and Eve wanting to go back to paradise? Isn't that the search of all human beings? Back to Eden. We all want to go back to Eden. We all want to go back to the fountain of youth, paradise, utopia, whatever you call it, the age of Aquarius. Everybody's looking for that. So what's the problem? We have to put an angel, cherub standing at the keruvim standing at the door, not letting them back in. So what's the story with the Garden of Eden anyway? Well, briefly, the Garden of Eden, the Torah, just like the human being, we are all which means the Torah is also structured like a human being. Like I mentioned before, everything is a microcosm, macrocosm. All of history is also like a child developing. The Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is like the early stage of history. They were like children, innocent, born 20 years old, the Medrash says, but they were naked and they were not ashamed. Why? Because they were pure. Just like a newborn child is not ashamed of its sexuality, you only become ashamed when others make you ashamed. When you live in a world where there is a profane and there's the holy. But if everything is holy, why would anyone be conscious of anything? Or to put it in more psychological or spiritual terms, when you're completely aligned with your purpose, there's no self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is a direct outgrowth of a duality between an object and a subject. There's me and there's the experience. So there's room for shame, there's room for consciousness. You'll see anyone who's completely immersed in an experience, they're not even conscious that they're immersed. That's what immersion means. In other words, you could say, for example, love. I feel love or I am love. It's not the same thing. Love is fundamentally a noun, not a verb. Anything real is not that I know the truth. You could be the truth. Not just I know things, I am things. I am knowledge, not just I know knowledge. A fish in the water, it's like asking the question, does water get wet? Does a fish get wet? Dry things get wet. Not something that doesn't get wet. It is wet. So true experiences don't have a subject and object. It's complete immersion. Adam and Eve did not have that self-consciousness until they ate from the tree of knowledge. That's why it's called knowledge. They suddenly knew good and evil. What, they didn't know there was good and evil before they ate? Of course they knew. But knowledge, it doesn't say Eitz HaChochma, it doesn't say Eitz HaBina, it says Eitz HaDas. Because you can know something cognitively, like I said, without experiencing. Das is intimate knowledge. You know, how many people have made the mistake where they said, you know what, since I know about it, I might as well taste it. Oh, no. Once you cross the line of tasting it, you're never the same. You cannot go back. You can read about it, you can hear about it, you can watch it. Once you did it, you're a new person. Because it's now an experience. An experience changes you. Adam and Eve knew, of course they knew. The first no, they knew because God said, eat this tree, don't eat from this tree. So right there they had a good right and wrong. They knew that before they ate from the tree of knowledge. Which answers the question some people say, what do you mean, if they didn't know good and evil, how could they make this choice? Because of course they knew, but they knew it in a detached way, like a tzaddik knows. Tzaddik also knows. A righteous person knows intellectually that there are right and wrong, even though they never tasted from the wrong. But once they tasted, everything changed. Now they became conscious human beings. Now I know many people think, well, consciousness and awareness, isn't that a good thing? Like, to be aware, to be conscious. Yes, it's better than not being conscious and aware, in the sense of being ignorant. But it's not as deep as being it, where you're not even conscious of it. You ever have immersed yourself in a project? You're so part of it, you forget that you're hungry or tired. Those are the most powerful experiences. You're it. You're not experiencing it, you are it. And that's the ultimate zone, as they call it, being in the zone. But now Adam and Eve became so-called, now they became players in the game. They're now bystanders as well. Now they can observe. And that's when it says they covered themselves, because now they were aware of their sexuality. They lost their innocence. They're no longer children. So this wasn't a punishment, them being banished from the garden. It was cause and effect. The Garden of Eden is a pure place. You're here because you're completely, seamlessly connected to your source. If not, you can't be here. So it's not some type of fairy tale imagery, like, an angel with a flaming sword standing there and says, no, you can't get back in. It's symbolic. What were they? Keruvim. It was children. That's what it was. It was children standing at the face of the garden. It was like the inner child of Adam and Eve, essentially saying, you're no longer a child. You lost your childhood. This place is no longer for you. You cannot experience the enchantment, the seamlessness, the magic of childhood any longer. Well, then it seems like, okay, it's all doomed. That's it. Damaged goods. No way back. That's not correct. The whole purpose of the Torah, Mount Sinai, it says, was to return to the place that was before the garden, before the tree of knowledge. It says in the Talmud that Posku Zumasan, the poison, the toxins that the poisonous serpent implanted in Adam and Eve, causing them to lose their innocence in the Garden of Eden, was eliminated when they received the Torah at Sinai. This Torah that's in the ark. However, it returned right afterwards when they built the golden calf. But what's inside the ark? Inside the ark you have both the complete tablets, which Moses received as a part of the Tshuva on Yom Kippur after the golden calf, and the broken tablets. Imagine in the same ark. Why would you want to have broken tablets that remind you of broken life, of broken promises, of the break that the Jews betrayed God with building of the golden calf? Because everything is included, everything is redeemable. There's no such thing of losing your wings. You always have your wings. So the mere fact that the keruvim stood at the Garden of Eden, not letting them back in, that was not about not letting them back in. It was reminding them, you want to come back in, you have to go back to your inner child. And you have the opportunity many times in your life. For that, you need to not turn the clock back. We can't reverse the clock, but you have to go deeper inside your soul and rediscover that innocent place. And the Baal Shem Tov gives a beautiful analogy how we rediscover our child. And therefore our ability to spread our wings again. You know what it is? He says, he brings the verse in the book of Psalms. Tfilu la'ani ki yatif, lefnei Hashem yishpach sichi. It says, like the prayer of a pauper, I wrap myself in. The prayer of a pauper, lefnei Hashem, before God, yishpach sichi, I pour out my voice, my words. The Baal Shem Tov asks a big question. He says, why does it say pauper? You're standing before God. Why should you have to stand like a pauper? You stand like a prosperous, wealthy person, standing in front of the king. And he gives this amazing analogy. He says there are two people invited to see this greatest king ever. One was a literate, educated, sophisticated aristocrat. And the other was a simple, ignorant, illiterate peasant. You get the imagery? They both come to see the king. The first comes the wise scholar, because he appreciates so much, and he's so smart and wise and educated. So when he enters the palace, he never saw anything like this. He appreciates the architecture, the libraries, the music, the art, the whole works. He's so enamored by it that he misses his appointment. This is the Baal Shem Tov's analogy. Then comes the illiterate peasant. He doesn't know anything about any of this. He never read. He's illiterate. However, he's innocent. He's pure. So he just walks right through all those chambers, ignoring it all because he had no appreciation for it. And instead of being bedazzled and distracted by all the majesty of the king, he ends up with the king himself. And of course asks for everything and learns also to appreciate everything that was outside of the inner chamber. So the Baal Shem Tov says when you stand before the core, what's called in Hasidic terminology, atzmos, the essence and core of reality, God, don't come with all your sophisticated tools. Suspend your literacy, come like a pauper. This isn't advocating illiteracy or poverty or being impoverished. It's advocating the ability to suspend and strip yourself from all the things that make you so great, because then you can experience something greater than yourself. And you won't be distracted by all the stations. You'll be able to experience the core essence itself. This is the secret that all the greatest tzaddikim in history, the greatest Rebbes, they always knew this secret. They never took themselves seriously. And they were great people. They were very great people. Because great people have a lot to give. Then they can appreciate their own gifts. But to be able to transcend even your greatness and realize that you stand with humility. What is the greatest compliment given to Moses? A man who's the only man that stood and spoke to God face to face, like a person speaks to his friend. That's the words in the Bible, in the Torah. Was that Moshe Ya'anov? He was the humblest man that ever walked on this earth. What means he was humble? Well, he wasn't aware of his strengths. He wasn't aware that God chose him to take the Jews out of Egypt, the parting of the sea, Mount Sinai, 40 years. He's the main character in the whole Torah, the greatest prophet man that ever lived. So it says he was fully aware. Oh no, humble doesn't mean shuffle, doesn't mean someone that's lacking self-esteem. A humble person has a very strong self-esteem and very strong awareness of himself. He's not delusional. But he says to himself or herself, these are not my gifts, they were given to me. And if someone else was received them, they would have done better than I. That's a true humble person. Moses was always aware of that because he understood there was something greater than him, it's called God. And he was able to stand, Pesi it says, Yamin l'chol, but Moshe sometimes says Moses is called a fool. I'm a fool. Because he understood all his wisdom when he stood in front of the divine presence, he dropped it all. Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem, the greatest wise person, realized that there's something beyond wisdom. Those are the wisest of them all. Look at the Talmud. Every chapter, tractate in the Talmud, you know what page it begins with? Where do pages in a book begin? Right? Page 1. The question they ask in Word is whether you want page 1 to appear or not to appear. But it's always page 1. In the Talmud, there is no page 1. It begins on page 2. Daf, Beis. Every Talmudic tractate begins Beis. 2-1. There's no such thing as 1A or 1B. It's 2A, 2B, and it goes from there. What happened with page 1? Jews know how to count. Because page 1 is blank. Before wisdom, Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem. Before you become filled with wisdom, you come with emptiness. You come with nothing. And that nothingness allows you to absorb the greatest wisdom, and you don't become your own worst enemy, distracted by your own strengths. Who is it that said? Oscar Wilde said that today, people think there's lower rate of illiteracy today than there used to be. He says, no, the only difference today and the past is that today, illiterate people know how to read. Which interesting take. That's just a footnote. But to go back to this concept, so how do you get back to that child? You have to be able to suspend your own strengths, which is not easy to do. Most of us think, okay, I'll suspend my weaknesses. Why would I suspend my strengths? Because it's not about suspending weaknesses and strengths, it's suspending yourself and your own self-perception, including your emotional self-perception. That is the secret to all growth. It's not about weakness or strength, it's about self. When you suspend yourself, you're able to be a container for that which is greater than yourself. Sounds like a simple formula. But we like the cake, our cake and have it too, eat it too, right? Have your cake and eat it too. You want to say, okay, listen, I want to have that which is beyond me, but I want to make sure I'm there to experience it. Well, my friends, it doesn't work so simple like that. The truest experiences happen when you're not looking. If you want it too much, it doesn't happen. There's an expression that kol haberech, anyone who pursues honor, the honor will elude you. And anyone who runs away from honor, the honor will pursue you. Now, running away from honor doesn't mean you're running and looking over your shoulder to see if it's chasing you. It actually means a person who's dedicated to some truth, and then they deserve to be honored. But we live in a world where people pursue their power, control, glory, and all that comes with that. Money, all those temporary things. And maybe sometimes gives even the illusion that some wings are flying. But the people who really fly are the people who are able to become those children. The children that stand at the garden and do not let anyone in, not because as a punishment or threat, because they don't belong there. They can't walk in there. And the children that are on top of the ark, that spread their wings and protect and shield true wisdom. It is, even though you can say, well, children don't yet have true wisdom, they're not yet developed minds, they haven't thought, they haven't studied. Yeah, but that's not where wisdom begins. That's already the application of wisdom. That's acquiring knowledge. The wisdom begins in the receptivity, the ability to absorb knowledge. Tell me, what kind of knowledge could we acquire if we didn't know the ABCs? Olive base. And then try teaching an adult who has not learned ABC. You tell me if you'll succeed. Once your mind is developed, once you're already an adult with ideas, it's very difficult to sit down and have the patience to learn ABC. I don't know if you remember sitting and writing with a notebook A like 1,000 times. I mean, do me a favor. Which adult would tolerate that? There's no way. Like this, so you have to begin as a child. So all knowledge began when we were children that you can say were ignorant, but we're not ignorant. What we were then is a clean slate, a dry sponge that can absorb everything. Today we're saturated sponges, if that. And that means that knowledge to enter, any real knowledge to enter, where is it entering? We're already filled with all kinds of stuff. How much is going on inside of our minds? How can we really can absorb new things? Not so simple. But there is opportunity, because we all have the ability with our minds to go to a place that cleans the slate. It doesn't mean that you have to forget everything you know. It means that at moments you just say, right now I push everything away and let me just absorb something new. Without interpretation, without judgment, without critique, just simply absorbing something new. So of course the immediate question is, how can I trust it? First I have to process. Well, okay, fine. So you know what? Test it. But once you do trust, you have to learn to absorb. You cannot become the expression goes, as I did the Torah Lemivla, when you're busy absorbing, you can't be busy transmitting. When you're busy transmitting, you can't be busy absorbing. I know some people have tried to master the art of speaking and listening at the same time. You're able to do that, but people think they can do it, or they think they got it already. So while you're middle sentence, they're already telling you their opinion, and they didn't even hear your full sentence, which means they probably not even responding to what you said, which has happened to me more than once. And I remember saying something, and someone says to me, they give me a response. I said, but that's not what I was saying. They said, well, that's what you should have said. They're telling me like my second half of the sentence wasn't consistent with their response, so therefore I should change my second half of the sentence. What do you think about that? Not that they have to respect my opinion, but that's somewhat a little ridiculous. But this is part of how relationships work. I've already discussed this many times about the ability to absorb versus the ability to process. I spent many, many years, one of my claim to fame is the years I spent listening to the Rebbe speaking for hours on Shabbos and Yontif, and there were no tape recorders, and no notes were taken. And we had to absorb 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7, 8 hours of dense talks. And then we had to recreate it, and not a summary, a full-length version, which sometimes is 80, 90 pages. That can't be repetitive. Try that. I'm not saying this to toot my horn. I'm saying that this is something that could be done, but you have to know how to spread your wings to do that. But the counterintuitive wisdom is you can't spread your wings by thinking that you're powerful. You spread your wings by first realizing that you're not. By first realizing that you're not as smart as you think you are. So I give you one exercise where this works. I've shared this exercise. Open up a book, any book, to a page, any page, and read it as many times as you like. And then close it, and the goal is for you to now write down on a piece of paper what you just read. Okay? And you can spend your whole life reading that page. I don't care how many times. You can do it in the privacy of your own home. No one has to watch you. And I've tried this with many people. And before we begin, I say, okay, so what do you think? Let's start with an estimate, a guess. Tell me a wild guess. How much percentage of what you read are you going to be able to convey accurately? Obviously, the goal is to be accurate. Most people say between 60 and 80%. Nobody has ever achieved that in the first chance. Try. I'm talking about hundreds of people that I've tried this with. Why? Because what happens is, the smarter they are, the faster they read the page. They're ready writing, they're ready. The smarter they are, the more it makes me smile, because I know that it's going to be the lowest percentage. And then we open up the book. You can't fake it. You open the book, we look at the page. We're not talking about word for word. The ideas, just to convey the ideas from the top of the page to the bottom. In most cases, 40% maximum. And the smarter you are, the lower the averages, because the smart person not only does not convey what it says, usually they're contradictory statements. Because they were so smart, they came what they thought it said, and they didn't write what it said here. They wrote what they thought it should say. They didn't even read the end of the sentence, and they had all the time in the world. So overconfidence was the key problem. The second time around, everybody goes up from 40 to around 50, 60%. Because the second time, nobody, you can see right away, it was embarrassing. So next time you read it differently. This I can tell you right now, guaranteed. Try it out. First time and the second time, you tell me. It's almost an inevitability. It doesn't matter. Even if you know the secret that I just said, you still are going to make the mistakes because we don't know how to absorb, really. We don't really fully absorb. We're partial absorbers. I would say pretty weak, actually. But it doesn't mean you can't learn how to absorb. Another exercise would be if you get into a fight with, let's say, your spouse or your partner, someone close. Here's another one. You're both disagreeing about something very adamantly. So try this on for size. Go back to that person and say, you know what? I want to hear what you have to say again. I may disagree, but I want to hear it. So share with me from beginning to end. I'm going to listen to my best of my ability. I'm going to repeat to you what you just said. And you tell me how accurate did I convey what you're saying to me. What do you think happens in most cases? They don't repeat it properly because it's very hard to repeat something you don't disagree with. What you do is you start tampering with it and you don't even realize how much. But if you allow yourself the humility to try this exercise, the other person will tell you, well, with all due respect, you didn't repeat what I said. And they'll point it out to you. If you're able to do that, you're already in good shape. Most people do not even have the ability to go there because they're too arrogant. Or they're so sure, no, I know better, that type of thing. These are exercises that just demonstrate, not meant to belittle anyone. It just shows us how we are untrained. We don't have trained minds. Why is this relevant? Because how are you ever going to discover your wings when you already have preconceived notions about who you are? It could be the things that you are thinking, projecting on, and projecting and think about yourself are your own worst enemy. You are the one that's blocking yourself from growing. I say perhaps simply just to not offend anybody. But I can tell you it's most likely the case. Now it's easy to go find the usual suspects and blame your mother and your father and your this one and that one and everybody did this to you. And I'm not saying that you don't have reasons. But now you're an adult. Now you want to figure out your life. What are you going to do? You want to just feel good and say, okay, here are the usual suspects and hang them up on your wall and say, okay, here's where I throw my darts at every day. This culprit, that culprit. Or you open up a Torah and Torah says, listen, there are two little children on top of the ark, and you are that child, and its wings are spread, but you need to be a child. And it doesn't exclude anyone. There's a boy and there's a girl. And these wings are a cover and are the beginning of all wisdom. Everything in the Torah. Even the broken parts of our lives, plus the complete luchas and the Torah scroll, are all covered by these wings. They have the ability to handle it all. And it's through these cherubs, between these places, where the voice of God communes. And it's interesting, the expression is v'ne'adati l'chasham. God says to Moses, v'ne'adati. You know the word ne'adati means? The translation they usually use is commune. I will arrange my meeting. But ne'adati means actually marriage. Actually, more specifically, it's the intimacy of marriage. Yud means intimate connection. God spoke to Moses like a spouse. He says, I will meet you intimately in the Holy of Holies, and I will speak to you there from between the children, between the two keruvim, with their wings spread, because that's where intimacy is experienced. Anyone who's had any healthy intimacy knows you don't come with sophisticated tools there, or all kinds of, today it's all about techniques. You come with innocence. You come with vulnerability. You come with celebrating your vulnerability. And it's the purest experience in life. But this is not something that many people are able to celebrate, because we're terrified of that type of vulnerability. We want control. So everyone's trying to master the art of having these beautiful experiences, but I want my control. I want to make sure I'm not going to be hurt. And I can even understand why. But what you're doing is essentially losing the key magic of it, which is all about the child within you, the purity, and it's a total experience. And that's what God says, that all my knowledge, all my communication, everything, the entire Torah, will come through these two keruvim. That's exactly the words. He says, I will meet you there, and I'll speak to you from above the cover between the two keruvim that are upon the ark. So if you think about it, it's an unbelievable lesson in innocence, in purity, in what children are. And we can ask the question for our own children, are we suppressing their wings? Are we helping them spread their wings? What's our message? And then, of course, the message to ourselves. What are we doing with our wings? Unfortunately, as I said, we live in a material world, and there's so many pressures, we have not much time to think about it. But as a result, essentially, who suffers? Your own soul is unable to fully find its song. So as we read this week's chapter, and we conclude the chapter, and we conclude the chapter, the entire story of a Shachanti b'seichem, I will rest among you. God rests among us in an intimate fashion. It's inside our innocence. That's the place where God resides most. Our sophistication and our tools are very nice as what we call ornaments. It's good decorations and props, good calling cards. But the key is the pure innocence. So it's like, many people were enamored by the film 2001, which has come and gone already. But the movie was the early Stanley Kubrick, right? And it's one of these science fiction, but it's captured the imagination, and not just because how the computer went crazy, but because at the end of it, it's all the search for the beginning of it all, and the end of it is a child. It all goes back to the child. You'll find in all poetry and all writings, you'll always find it always goes back to the innocence of a child. Everyone's looking for the innocence. Citizen Kane, some people see as the greatest film. It's about this egomaniac, this was supposed to be a takeoff of Randolph Hearst, Kane, right? William Kane, Rosebud. He's trying to find back his innocence that he lost when he was a child. It's the secret of the whole story. And you see this again and again. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for that purity. But we live in a world which does not respect it, so we find all these sophisticated distractions. But at the end of the day, God is like a young child, surrounded himself with a very sophisticated system that looks complex and seems extremely brilliant. It reminds me of the Wizard of Oz, Once you pull open the curtain, it's just a simple country, whatever he was. Schmendrick, whatever you want to call it. I'm not comparing that to God, obviously, Lahavdil. some of, everyone finds Jewish connections, Wizard of Oz, Ein Oz Illiterate Oz, whatever. But I want to just conclude and say that it's the most beautiful experience to be able to be with people that you trust, people you can be vulnerable with and not be hurt, know that people are not going to take advantage, and allow yourself to really kick off your shoes and be yourself. It's the purest thing that a person can be. So I want to wish it upon all of you that you find such environments and friends and people, not necessarily all over the place. It's a very precious thing to discover. But when you do, it really allows you to be this child with the wings on top of the ark, which is what we are trying to recreate. And then you have the true v'shachanti b'seichel, the divine presence resting among us all, within each all. So with that said, as I said, the blessing, all of you should have that type of experience, beginning today, tomorrow, tonight. And I want to finally dedicate this class at Refuah Shlema to Yeshayo ben Rasha for Refuah Shlema, and announce that we will be here next Wednesday as an ongoing journey. Philip will be giving his class Wednesday night. And please see me as a friend, a vulnerable friend that is more than happy to help in any possible way. I find this to be the most sacred thing a person can do in this life, is to honor and celebrate the dignity and the majesty of each of our unique journeys. And at the end of the day, we are these little children locked in these adult bodies with all its complexities and with our wings waiting to be released. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Did you name it Lechatchila good?